Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those joining us out west. I'm Karen Langdon with the National Emergency Management Association. Welcome to the NEMA Empowerment e-learning series. We're so grateful that you've joined us today. NEMA is very fortunate to have amongst its members some of the most experienced and knowledgeable experts in emergency management, and we're very excited to bring you this series to help share their wealth of knowledge and expertise to work towards a more prepared, resilient, and ready nation. Today, we're happy to present Mission Ready, Reinforcing Preparedness Through Smarter Training Strategies. And we'd like to thank Vector Solutions for sponsoring the session today. Thank you again for being with us today. And now it's my pleasure to pass the session to our moderator, Robbie King. Welcome, Robbie. The floor is yours.
I appreciate it very much, Karen, and I appreciate everybody joining us today. I'm excited today for a couple of reasons. First, I get to work with my buddy, Chief Schranz. Welcome, sir.
Hey, Robbie, and glad to be here with you and the NEMA team, as well as all of our participants. So look forward to this.
You know, one of the things that separates us from a lot of other organizations is we come with you with decades of experience. We have the same bumps and bruises, and as you all, as we're handling those or mitigating those emergencies. So today, I'm really excited to be talking about a few big areas with you, Matt, and getting your amazing insight as well. Matt, you're in the fire service today, specifically still active in the Illinois Fire Service as well. So I appreciate you continue to do that. And just on an old guy like me who's just retired. So it's great for us to be able to use your insight as well. If we don't mind, let's move on to the next slide. We don't want to see everybody mugs on the screen like that. Today, I love these topics. We want to share with you. We are going to be asking questions and those types of things. So don't be bashful today of dropping questions in there. Or if we ask a question, just drop that response there in the questions box. We'll be able to filter through those. But we want to make sure that this is not just engaging, but informative, and we have to learn from you all as well. So as we talk about the training and readiness, that was a big one for me when we were talking about today's topics. Matt, the challenges that limit preparedness, building a blended learning strategy, and measuring and sustaining readiness. So I don't want to spend any more time on this one here. But I'm with you. The challenges that limit preparedness. I saw someone else put a note on there, and I like that one. Let's move on to the next slide so we can dive deeper into the topics here. Matt, before I turn this over to you, you know, when we were first talking about this, I really well, I appreciate that, sir. I'll swap out the microphones just a second. My thing, Matt, when we were talking about this one was the impactfulness of what's different from when I first started in the fire service and when I was getting my EMA credentials and those type of things is really how things have changed. That checklist that we used to have is way out of pocket and all of this. So I didn't know what you wanted to bring up in this one here, but that, to me, that was just really an impactfulness of what the checklist isn't there anymore.
Yep, very much. You know, and Ashley, you could go on to the next slide for us as I start off here. You know, when you look at the gap between training and readiness, we have always historically in public safety, and I'm going to talk for a moment, not just on an emergency management piece, but all of public safety, police, fire, EMS, emergency management, our dispatchers. Because I look at this piece as when does emergency management get involved? It's when all of us are involved from all lanes of public safety. Whether it's disaster response, whether it's localized events that are going on and we're supporting one another. And we all train, but it's about training to be ready and looking at that gap Whether you look at it as a SWOT analysis, whether you look at it as just a simple baseline of where you're at and where is your vision of your organization going. And I try to break it down into four distinct areas. How complex is our processes? What is the expectations and really the vision of the organization, whether it's a local, a regional, a statewide approach? What are the gaps that we see today that are creating us challenges for that vision? And then how can we work to overcome those to ultimately be the most prepared? And so when we break that down, and we look at, and first on the left-hand side of the screen there, and we look at, just the complexity of the incidents that we are going to. When I was doing some analytics recently for a project, and I looked back at the different types of incidents. We know over the last couple of years, we've seen an increase in wildland fires. We've seen an increase in disaster responses with weather events. Here I'm in the Midwest today. We're getting ready to hunker down for some pretty significant storms that are going to be coming in my area here in the next probably hour and a half. When we look at that, those have drastically increased over time. Now, one might ask, what's the root causes of that? And I look at it as to me, it doesn't really matter what the root causes are. I have to be prepared for those. I can't worry about the precursors. I just need to make sure that my people, the people that I'm surrounding myself for, are at the utmost readiness in there. And when I was doing my recent project, I looked at the number of disasters overall, including the weather events, wildland fires, just generalized events that emergency management gets involved in. Since 2010, so over the last 16 years, we've seen almost a 76% increase in the frequency of those events. And so when you look at, yes, we've always been training, but how can we tie the increased impact of our responses to the frequency of those responses to ultimately narrow that gap? As we look at growing expectations, I'm a firm believer each and every day we have to have both a vision and expectations of those visions. We have to be able to understand what is in our scope of practice, whether you're a smaller state, or I see some friends here from some of the largest states, across the United States. We have to be able to understand what are our lanes that we live in, what are the challenges within those lanes, and how can we live in a world that our vision matches that? Because we can't be successful. We can't narrow that gap. We can't increase our compliance metrics if we don't have that vision. But we can't have a vision if we don't live within our means. No different than you wake up every day and you pay bills. So you got to live within your means. You wake up and you want to go buy a new car. You have to live within your means. Our vision of how we are going to train and prepare people has to be within our means. We cannot want more out of that than what we have. Recently, I was doing some training. I serve as a senior advisor on a regional incident management team. We were doing some analysis of some of the training that we were putting out there, and we had a newer individual come in and they were sharing some thoughts and ideas on what we could do and how we were going to better prepare for certain types of incidents. And one of the challenges that we identified was they were really great concepts, but they lived without the means of what our average responses were. Now, yes, we can't prepare for each and every single disaster or incident or challenge that we're going to be faced with on a day-to-day basis. But we have to be able to have an open mindset that provides critical thinking aspects to that, to ultimately try to meet the benchmarks and the metrics that are within our means. So when we talk about that and how do we become prepared in that, the difference really becomes of what training are you conducting, both regionally within your states and across the state as an entire spectrum. And I'm going to touch on why I bring up the regional approach here in a moment. But it doesn't automatically, just because I deliver a course, and we're going to spend a lot of time about how to get more out of that skill assessment piece today. But just because I say I did a training doesn't automatically make me prepared. Just because I put somebody in an online course through FEMA and ask them to complete that and give Robbie the certificate doesn't mean that they comprehended the information that was conducted. So it's about continually evaluating our people that we support to have a true definition of what training means to be ready. Not just saying, give me a piece of paper and let me check a box off and have a nice day, but are we conducting tabletop exercises? Are we conducting hands-on interaction to truly grasp what our people are retaining when they're, completing those trainings? Now, I did mention there, and actually, you can go on to the next slide as I'm bringing the regional approach up. When we talk about a regional perspective and how it ties directly to a state. Now, there is some very defined things that go on at the local and regional level. I don't want to ever discredit those because those lay the barriers and the foundations for the state level approach. The things that we're talking about at a state level, they're ultimately affecting what departments, agencies, emergency management crews, CERT members are doing at the local level. And so, how do we get the biggest bang for our buck by getting this training and information out there? It's by oftentimes that regional approach, not just sending it from a state down or vice versa back up, but it's working with our regional partners to sharing a message, sharing that vision, sharing the impact, and getting their buy-in and engagement into that so that they can go back to the regional levels and foster that same message across the entire state. And that is where success comes from. If I can get buy-in and engagement from my regional partners, it's ultimately going to go downhill to the local agencies, but it's also going to translate back up, and we're going to see those improvements and understanding of the training and the readiness gap really minimizing there based off of the information that we're sharing. If I just send out an email and say, hey, this is the new policy for the state of Robbie King, guess what? People are going to open that email up. They get 1,000 emails a day. They're going to close it and they're never going to read it. But if we train and we have engagement and partnership across the entire state and we foster that relationship with our regional partners, now is where we're going to see that face-to-face interaction, that hands-on approach, that dialogue back and forth. And it's going to translate from the state level down to the regional level, down to the localized level there. So Robbie, as we talk about the realities that we're faced with, I thought maybe you could talk to us a little bit about some of those realities and how we start to engage those training pieces into the reality of what emergency management partners are faced with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Matt. You had such as we look at how all of this is occurring, to me, when we look at the reality of all of these items, if we don't put each one of these steps in place, in focused in on what those expectations are in training, we can't expect people to be successful during that emergency. So for me, we talk about those realities, figuring out, when we talk about required training completions, those types of things. To me, that is one way to look at it. But are you looking at really what the job entails to be able to get there, and how it's in the framework of ICS and NEMS, whether you're using, whatever type of format your EOC is in there. But we have to focus back into those exercises and getting everybody to be participating in all of those pieces. I can remember we started with small exercises to get just people into the format. We ran with ESFs as our format, but what does that really mean? Because it was new to us, but we really just wanted people to get accustomed to coming and running big evolutions. So, and it did pay off for us. And so when we look at what positions have to be filled and those types of things, we go to filling these pieces out. It was kind of comical to me, Matt, and I'm sure it wasn't for anybody else, but if you're the fire chief, or in this case, the deputy fire chief, what is your role? Is the fire chief going to go be there? And are they willing to relinquish command of the on-scene operations to go fill those EOCs? All of those areas have to be really defined and built back out. Even with our non-governmental agencies that are out there that are still part of our communities, and as we work through those. And so when we look at the deployment, what can we actually do? What can we actually afford to do? When we started our Task Force 5 there in Georgia, what was my commitment level? I still had to take care of home. I still wanted to go help my neighbors. I still wanted to go help anybody, but I still have a commitment to be able to be ready. And what does that look like? And making sure that our capabilities are fully developed, not underdeveloped as we look at those things. And so to me, we have to do those exercises to run through all of these areas. So when we identify a gap, we can have a training plan to get us there, but also setting real expectations with our executives, whether that is a city council, whether that is a county commission or the state, and those types of things. To me, that really is the important part, because today's world, they're just reading the news and trying to think of what the talk shows are going to be talking about and those types of things. But to me, that reality is being able to put the pen to paper to our hands and really assess where we're at in all of this as well. I probably went off topic for you, but I can remember those early days of getting the EOC going.
You bring up a really good point there with when you think about who is filling those key positions, right? And one of the things that I think we as a society, and I'm gonna reference all lanes of public safety, that we can always do a better job at is succession planning. And when we talk about filling key roles in those positions, we need to be fostering an environment that as we're doing tabletop exercises, as we're doing these training evolutions to prepare for the real world reality, it should be a bring a friend. Let me teach the next person who's going to be my replacement now. And sometimes we don't know who that person is, and other times it's fostering that relationship, that environment, to say, hey, I'm bringing a friend along. I want them to see what this is about. Because the last thing that we want to embed into that is that capability is underdeveloped based off of the fact that I didn't teach that friend. I didn't teach that next person. And then all of a sudden they take over for me. And tomorrow that major disaster comes in. And now they're put into a role in a seat, and they walk in and their head is 3 miles wide, and they're sitting there twiddling their thumb like, where do I begin? I'm lost. Where do I start? And so we have to foster that environment of how are we teaching the next generation of our emergency managers? How are we teaching our next generation of our law enforcement partners and what their roles in the EOC are? Our hospitals, our stakeholders in the community, our fire service personnel, our county officials, our local officials. When we're bringing them in, the time to really make them comfortable in that room, working together hand in hand, networking, building relationships is not the time for the incident. And so it's always that checks and balances to understand what are we doing to prepare everyone around us, not just the current people, but the future people as well when they take on those roles.
I love your note there. Preparedness is measured by the capability, not course completions. And when we think about those times where, hey, I got this training, I didn't even, when you're doing that task book, you still may find times where, are you really ready? Am I ready to lead this group of people? Do I have that experience and those sort of things? We hope that task books get you to those pieces, but just because you took a class, I just remember thinking of all my USAR training that I took. It was I was a little apprehensive to go out there and start running off the side of a building or diving into a tank and those types of things, taking care of those things. So to me, I love that emphasis on there, and that's the importance of having the training and those exercises to get people into that muscle memory. Because I was an operations type of person. I loved being in there, but the first time in plans section, being able to develop a plan and to think about real resources and what it takes to complete those areas, it's a big advance.
Very much. You can go to the next slide for us. So as we talk about why this matters more than ever, when we look at today's operating environments and the challenges that we previously had talked about, we all, I'm sure most of us, probably were in positions where we were affected by some unexpected things over the last handful of years. All of us and joining today experienced things in the last 4, 5, 6 years. Think about those public health emergencies and how prepared were we from an emergency management perspective when COVID hit. I think back to the precursor to that when Ebola hit, and we were, tasked with things that, and a lot of times we probably didn't plan and think of. We might have had some tabletop exercises and, handing out medications to our first responders and things of that nature. But when we look at the complexity that we were faced with, and then we roll in other events, we have infrastructure disruptions throughout our communities that we have to support. Well, now the local community can't sustain both. They have to reach out to their regional partners. Well, how are their resource capabilities, tied to the personnel and staffing of those? Okay, well, maybe we need to reach out to our state partners because we have to take a more widespread approach to this. And, so when I think about our operating environment today, disasters and weather events, those are common. Wildlands, we know they're there, they're on an increase. We still have to support the fire service and our peers that are out there doing this. But when we look at the challenges that are faced with, a lot of times it's those pieces that we train on, we prepare on, but we never know the complexity of those. Because when, I reference Ebola versus COVID, two completely different, subsets of complexity that we had to deal with, and one was more of a regionalized, approach where the other one hit the entire nation. And how do we get resources? How do we get PPE? How do we, prepare people across all of this in a holistic environment to where we can be successful? I see that comment that just came in. You're experiencing record flooding during COVID, a whole nother challenge. Because here we're out there, we're testing people for COVID, we're doing, assisting with traffic control. Now all of a sudden you have a flood come in. Well, where do we put those people? How do we get them around? So all of those, we're never going to live in a perfect world. We can't train on every scenario. But what matters is that we're thinking about these things. We're having these conversations today for what might happen tomorrow. And we want to be in that proactive state. And it brings it down into how do we coordinate these efforts? When you have somebody new, and I mentioned the succession planning piece before, Robbie, when you come into a new role, do you know who to contact? Whether you're at the state level, you're at a regional level reporting to the state partners. Do you know who to contact? Do you know who your peers and your resources are going to be and your advocates are going to be both on the uphill battle and the downhill battle as well. Because sometimes you need to reach out to those local and regional folks to help you get the message across at the state level. And so it's important to have those contacts and that networking to coordinate those events. What resources across the state do we have? We referenced as an example PPE. Well, do we have a good understanding of where that PPE is stored at? What our quantities are? When was the last time it was inventoried and checked? Is it still good? Is it a box of EMS gloves and face masks that got tucked away in a cargo container hasn't been checked in 5 years, and what's the dexterity of it and how well is it ready to be deployed out today? Those are all factors that we have to be able to have for effective decision making. And so as we talk about the questions no longer how did we train on these pieces, rather whether the personnel can perform that incident. And all of these factors that you see here lead up to that. It's about having those conversations today to make sure that we can perform tomorrow, and really lay the standard and tie it to your vision and your expectations of your particular organizations there.
I love that, Matt. And just to add one piece, I just want to see if anybody's willing to say in the chat or through the question feature. To me, when I think of that is, are your officials asking you to prove any of this? And if so, how are you proving this? Is it by having honest scenario exercises where you're giving those reports, identifying those areas? I think everybody understands that, we can try to meet something. We've done these other things, but sometimes we have to circle back and do that additional pieces. And so to me, I was just curious if people are being asked to show or validate the proof that you are ready. And what does ready mean in those pieces as well? Sorry for interrupting, Matt.
Nope, you're all good. And as we round out that section and we're waiting for some responses, hopefully to come in here on that, if we can go ahead to the next slide. So Robbie, as we identified, and I always like to, whenever I talk and you and I present together, we always talk about what are our current challenges and then how do we overcome those. And so I think what's important to understand with the gap between training and readiness is how can we turn training opportunities into real world readiness based off of understanding the worlds that we live in today. One of the first things I said is living within our means and having those expectations that tie to that. But how can we turn training opportunities all across the board, from a national level, from a state level, from a regional, local level, into those real world readinesses and training for the events that we're actually going to be faced with? Now, not to discredit, you had referenced, when you joined the USAR team. Yes, we know that USAR deployments are going to go all over the country, especially depending on the teams that you're on. Well, doesn't discredit training on those other events, but we have to start somewhere first, and that's training on your localized pieces that are going to affect your state as a whole, the region that you belong to, the locality that you belong to, and then expand out from there. We could go to the next slide. So, Robbie, as we move on and we bring up some of these points that are being left in the comments box, I want to spend some time talking about, now that we identified those gaps and how to understand those gaps. I think we should talk about the challenges that we experience with those gaps and how they actually can affect and limit the preparedness level that we need to be at, and how can we overcome those challenges to have a more successful experience for our partners across the state. So as we go to the next slide, Robbie, as we look at this, and I know it looks very elementary, but I go back to, how do we fit all these puzzle pieces together? As we start in one area and we work across the board. It's one aspect is about training people. It's about looking for those opportunities and experiences to get into, one of the pieces that you mentioned before with task books. How can I track the progress of that program as you're training people for the next level? One of the things that I think uh, society has completely changed for us is the evolution of how we teach and train people. When we look at not only multiple disciplines, but we look at the challenges in getting these folks in, whether from a paid, a part-time, or a voluntary capacity. How can we enhance that experience for people to respect their lifestyles, to accommodate around the needs so we still can meet the common good, but we can still be prepared. So first puzzle piece there is how can we tie a hybrid learning approach into our overall preparedness. As we are going to have an in-person training event, we're going to bring people together and we're going to review those tabletop exercises or those hands-on training exercises. We need to be prepared for what we are going to experience. And so how can we maximize the time to be respectful for people? They are driven on hands-on training. Nobody as much as we sit in front and people scroll on social media and they're in YouTube and they're watching videos and they're checking emails, they think twice about going in and taking online training. But if we can instill that, hey, you take this online training course, Robbie, and next week when you come for that hands-on tabletop exercise or that hands-on training exercise that we are going to conduct, guess what? You're not sitting in the classroom. You're out, boots on the ground. We're doing some real world stuff, and now you're enticed because it's not just another training class. I'm not just another death by PowerPoint sitting in a classroom listening to Matt talk again. It's that hands-on approach and engaging approach. And what we have traditionally seen across all public sector, and I'm going to reference CERT teams, I'm going to reference emergency management, EMS providers, firefighters, law enforcement partners, by engaging them into an experience where I can give them a small amount of information, snackable learning ahead of time, to where they show up at the day of the event now. We can have that engaging face-to-face interaction, whether it's sitting in the room doing a tabletop exercise, we're in the EOC doing a tabletop exercise, or we do a full-scale exercise out on the grounds. That engaging experience, because they know what they're coming for. They know what that agenda is. They know, hey, I'm not just going to walk into another class. I'm going to be challenged. My mind's going to be stretched with what I can do, what my capabilities are, to fully understand how ready we are and how we're meeting those requirements. So as we go across the screen here and we start to build that puzzle, it's about being able to bridge that gap up into how ready are we. We go out, you and I go out on the drill ground, Robbie. We do an exercise. Well, you know what? We realize that these are our deficiencies and flaws. Several years ago, I ran one of my first hands-on full-scale exercises was a tornado into a jail with about 350 people. And the initial companies, we purposely picked based off of their skill sets. So the initial responders that were coming in, both law enforcement and firefighters, I was co-running this operation, and we strategically picked really strong firefighting crews and really strong law enforcement officers, because we knew that they were really strong in their individual disciplines, but they weren't going to be as strong in this discipline, in this scenario. Yeah. And we wanted to prove a point to them that you could always be better. And so as we tasked them, and we did the hot wash after the event, several hours into this full-scale exercise, one of the first questions that I asked the initial company officer and the initial law enforcement officer that arrived on the scene was, were you prepared? And they both looked with the ghost look in their face and they said, absolutely not. Had no clue what I was walking into. I thought that this was going to be a routine call. You gave the information you gave us was completely the opposite, and I became complacent. What did that do? That set the tone. That set the tone for everybody in the room to say, let's not be complacent. These are strong people at their jobs. They're probably some of the best people at doing their jobs in the room, but they even identified themselves that yes, we could have done a lot better because we became complacent based off of everyday routine, incidents and responses. And so being able to understand where we're at, how we train on it, how we follow that progress, and then ultimately how do we document that to show, you know what, we had a struggle here today, let's be better tomorrow. And as we're documenting that, how can we increase that documentation? It's about having an objective approach. And by doing those documentation pieces, not to call somebody out, but to say, hey, we see an area for improvement here. This is what we're going to do to improve that. And then let's retrain on it. Let's retest on it. Let's make sure that we are meeting that mark based off of the information that we identified in there.
That was great stuff. I just want to interject, if it's okay. Yeah, okay. Just make sure. The piece to that to me is what goes into that tracking. I think for me it was always at a county level of preparedness and those type of things. But many of our attendees are at a state level and even higher. I think about those types of things of being able to track each one of those areas. Is this a federal mandate? Is it a state mandate? Is there regional aspects to all of this? Of being able to, that has to be very hard because you're right. We do have those volunteers, those part-time people, and we have to be able to cater to them and all of their needs as well in this facing and as a changing face of all of this. And so for me, thinking about those requirements and building it backwards to get to those pieces are important as well. I don't want to steal any thunder for the next slide, but this one, that to me would have to be tremendous on what they're doing, especially if they don't have a tool to keep track of those things.
Very much. And as you go to the next slide for us, very much, Robbie, as we look at some of the involvement and the challenges, I always will go back to, exercises are essential because we as a human, the majority of population learns better by visually seeing things and putting our hands on those tasks. And there is people that can sit and learn better in a classroom. They are there, they do exist, but there's a very important factor to be able to tie that together. But as we evolve with how do we still get this information out there? And one of the comments that was left there is changing, the upcoming changing of FEMA and state requirements. It is extremely important because we have to have a defined opportunity. And how are we going to change those requirements that are coming out rapidly and evolving to our current training programs? And there's a lot of ways to use tools in the toolbox and resources out there to get that information out. But before when FEMA was putting classes out at a wide scale, whether it's the online learning or it's coming out and doing functional and tabletop exercises, and they're evaluating those, once those resources change and the table turns, what are you really afforded the opportunity at a state level to be able to support that? Do you have enough resources? Do you have enough staffing to support the evaluation process of that? Do you understand certain areas of your state, not only where those resources are, but who has what capabilities and what level they are trained at? And once we change those requirements and we now take that off of the federal level and we put it onto the state level, Now that's going to enhance that experience because what I envision is states are going to be required to put more resources towards this training, more staffing towards this training. And how can you manage that? Not just understanding where those resources are, but how can we manage the curriculum? How can we manage testing with our people? How can we get feedback and analytics on our people? How do we truly understand the capacities in there? And those are all challenges that, yes, FEMA was addressing over the course of time, but there was also a lot of gaps there that we also know that were identified. And so as these changes do occur with FEMA down to the state requirements, I think we have to be thinking long term, 3, 5, 7 years out. How are we going to support these requirements? Whether they come or they end up not coming, we always have to be on the tip of our toes to really have an open mind of how, if all of a sudden tomorrow the state is fully responsible to evaluate these full scale exercises, if the state is responsible to fully support the emergency management training across the entire state to all lanes, how are we going to provide that? How are we going to get that information out? How are we going to register people? How are we going to test people? How are we going to manage curriculums and changes in the curriculums and new information that's coming out? Those are the challenges that we are faced with today with that exercise gap, because the gap is there already. We know that. But it's about not thinking about today as it stands right in front of us. It's about thinking that distance in front, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years out. What are we going to do? How are we going to evolve with that to have a successful environment for all of our people?
I think of that, the importance of beginning with that tabletop exercise. I think to me, that's a lot of times where things can sound good until you get to that tabletop, and then maybe you make it through there fine, but then you start thinking about, okay, so we're doing X. What really goes into this? So being able to provide that functional exercise went in there. Not to tell a war story, Matt, we did. We were on the coast, and we decided that the best way to make re-entry is to have law enforcement with us, have a utility provider with us, and we also needed fire and EMS, and we also needed a public works employee with a front end loader, those types of things. Well, we quickly, after a tornado, tried to get through there. The amount of time it took to clear that space, to clear that debris, use tin cans of Fix-A-Flat and all those tires, those types of things. It really, that functional exercise really set the pace on how long it was going to take to get back into our population areas from where we evacuated from, and those types of things. So before we even get to that full scale exercise, that's a great thing about having those functional exercises to run through. We realized that we needed a mechanic. That never seen a front end loader break, but it was during those exercises that, oh, it's not going to start. Imagine that, and how the time that goes in there. I think that helps set those parameters in place to understand really how long these things are going to take, and that availability for your staff, the budget, and all the rest of those things is pretty amazing.
Very much. If you could go to the next slide for us.
This is a good one.
So we talk about how to be able to evaluate and really face those challenges head on. And we talked about that just a simple piece of training documentation does not tell the entire story. It tells part of the story. We have to really look at those challenges. Not only did you conduct the training, but we want to be able to have that objective approach on who participated in those full-scale exercises, who participated in tabletop exercises, who needs to have retraining, who needs to getting into the corrective actions. It's not, hey, Robbie, I'm going to come slap you on the hand and discipline you here, but we want to have a good understanding is, hey, Robbie, you were trained in this. Then we went into this full scale exercise, but we identified these deficiencies. So what can we do to make you and your organization better? How can we provide a training plan to the needs of the organization? I think it's about that benchmark, that baseline understanding of how do we get to that benchmark approach, and what's the expectation. It goes back to the very beginning. What's the vision and expectation? And then when we talk about the ability to credential people, credentialing goes into two aspects. One, giving people certifications that for the training that they've completed. But the second part of that credential is who is effectively, not just that you completed that training, but who's covered all three bases leading up to that credential status. Who did the training, completed it successfully, did their remedial training if they needed it, who was, tasked and evaluated on their exercise participation.
Yeah.
And then we qualify them. But that's, again, only part of it. Because as we qualify people, we want to know who's qualified and where they are qualified at. When you look at the makeup of emergency management, and we think of all the partners across the state that support those agencies, and that really that agency as a whole, that's where, when I brought up in the very beginning, all of our stakeholders across the board that are friends to this, we have to understand how we qualify them, and also what the continuing education of that looks like from a big picture. And when, that can't always be the state agency's requirement to fulfill that. That's especially with staffing resources and other challenges. And, like we identified with the potential changes of who's going to be required to oversee this, we have to come up with an environment where we are sharing information. I can see what Robbie's doing when Robbie's a part of the emergency management team. He can see what Matt's doing. We have that uniformity. We talk for years about unified command. We all stand there, we run an incident, but how come our training is not unified together? And how come we cannot pull what agencies are doing across an entire state from one organization, one entity to the other? What are our law enforcement partners doing? What is our hospital staff that's going to come in and join us in the EOC? What is our CERT members doing? And being able to bring all of that information under one umbrella as needed, keyword as needed, to have that true readiness platform. So from the state level, when you have a disaster that hits, when you have a task that requires emergency management support, we have a defined understanding of who is actually qualified within there.
I love that, Matt. And my agency, we've got a couple of amazing people. I referenced them today as the Shrants of the department, right? So the premise is, I could ask these handful of people to do anything, and they could go out and perform and execute at a higher level. But when we look at these exercises, we're putting people in certain areas and they're doing these tasks. They can't be everywhere and they can't do everything on those pieces. So to me, that's really an important area, because it's just not the completed training. It's that participation in those exercises. And if there is a gap, we can take those corrective actions to make those improvements. Maybe it's a little sidebar training or getting people up and running and those types of things. But to me, that really is an important part in making sure that if the information does exist, it ain't being in a single place. I am sure that doesn't happen in today's world, but I know that was for us back in the day. Hopefully, if there is, we get that changed out. As we go on to the next slide for Matt, he's going to come off mute in just a second. There we go.
Rookie move there. I muted myself and forgot. But it comes back to, as we identify those gaps before that incident occurs, the proactive approach to it. And that's really going to go miles for us. So, Ashley, as you can go to the next slide for us. Robbie, I thought we could spend just a few minutes as we wrap up here talking about what that blended learning strategy really looks like. I mentioned it before, kind of gave that teaser out there. As we progress here, I wanted to see if you could talk to us on the next slide there for us, just on the overall big picture of what does a blended learning strategy actually look like in this process.
Yeah. I love this because training is definitely not enough. We have to put things in place to get that compliance that we're looking for. So yes, we need to do the training. We need to be able to have training that is specific for those roles to make sure whether it is an online training where we're maximizing the hands-on training component of it, but we have to have that pieces that come together that are going to enable us to have the requisite knowledge to be able to perform these tasks. And then as we apply those skills in those training, that's where us in our world we live on a daily basis. Is it's not that we're smart, but can we get it to that we're smart and we can get it to our hands as well and put that into a practice to where it becomes second nature. I think back to uh, tying ropes and knots. We were doing knots, we were good, but could we tie them behind our back wearing gloves? That's the type of practice that we need in all of our skills so that it becomes muscle memory. We're not thinking about what the next step is. We know what that step is, and our muscles know exactly where to go as we do in those. And then we have to run that exercise to put everything in place, making sure, hey, do we have enough resources in there? Earlier, you had a slide point in there about staff availability. Are you calling in a neighboring group, whether it's another state, another area, to come in to help be your evaluators, to run that exercise and have that non-bias that goes in there to really allow us to evaluate, are we ready? Are we ready for that next piece? So having that evaluation and then circling back on that improvement. You run an exercise. What are you doing for the next 10 months? Hopefully you're training in those areas for that improvement, but it's a full circle there because we are going to need to worry about succession. Somebody retires out, somebody gets promoted back up. We need to replace those people. And as people move up in these roles, that the whole practice goes back where the whole practice of gaining that knowledge, applying it in practice, validating it in the exercise, and then reevaluating, do that improvement. Next thing you know, it's all back in there. To me, I think this group has probably one of their hardest jobs, not because they're at a state level or a region level or a federal level, but because the things that they have to worry about is so wide and they're working with so many partners in all of this. And to me, in plans, we have the training P and the planning P and all the rest of those things, but it's just a constant rebuild, a revalidation, but it's also allowing you to come back for justification for budget. It's allowing you to come back asking for additional needs of help, whether it's from downstream or upstream, it doesn't matter. We just need those resources to take care of those things. So when we're talking about this here, to me, each component has to reinforce each other, like that visual. It's a lock in there. It's a lockstep in all these things.
Yeah, very much. And I think that'll tie good into the next slide that we go to is, Robbie, as you're talking about those pieces and how they all come together, when we look at how do we start that out through that online learning support, we identified early that we all deal with society today that everybody is busy along the way. And how can we still get to an end goal by providing an environment for people to be successful? So when we think about, the basics, we all know about, NIMS and ICS training requirements. But what are your statewide policies and procedures? How do you disseminate those policies and procedures out to all your folks in the various regions across your state? And then how do they translate that information out to the next layer within there? What are the compliance requirements? So when you look at the transition from the requirements being managed from the feds down to the state level, uh, is that bound to policy and procedure within the organization? Is that bound by legislation that is put out there? And what are those requirements that you have to fulfill? And how, again, are you disseminating that information out to the common good in there and getting that message out, but not just sending the message out? Hey, Robbie, I want to know. It's kind of like a fishing pole. I'm gonna throw it out there. I'm gonna give that lure. We're gonna deliver that training. And as I reel it back in, I want to know that you retain that information. And we list out some others of onboard training and refresher CEs and role specific learning plans. That's a way to use online in the right context. You can't solely live in a world, though, that online is the only thing, because there is something to be said for that face-to-face interaction. But if I can train somebody on what it means to be an incident manager, what it means to run an EOC, or to build requirements to have a learning plan to become a member of the EOC, that is where that face-to-face interaction. Now, I learned this. I'm going to walk in the room, and I'm going to look at Robbie face to face, have eye contact, have a conversation, and build a relationship so that as we show up to that incident, we're all working together. We understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. We understand knowledge levels. We can support one another to get to that end goal. And that's where the online learning benefits allow us to cover what we need to cover before the day of the event. We show up, now we have that face-to-face interaction. It gives us more time to converse back and forth about how we're going to handle those incidents, how we're going to coordinate events, how we're going to make decisions based off of resource allocations, where we're going to deploy those resources out, how we're going to enact the EOC and balance the EOC out for different positions and responsibilities in there. That is the ability to get the information out there early, but not replace the ability to have interaction, not replace the ability to have hands-on preparedness and execution there within that. Ashley, if you can go to the next slide for us.
As you continue on, Matt, talking about reinforcing that learning through the practical application, that to me is really where the rubber hits the road. And I just want to make sure everybody, is focused in on that. And you're right, that online just sets us up for success later on as well. But you want to cover this next section as we finish up? I see the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you can go to the next slide for us. Actually, you can go 2 slides ahead. As we talk about measuring the sustainability of that, and we measure our preparedness, not just that participation as we talked about today. It comes down into, yes, the basics. I always say the who, what, when, where, and why. Robbie and Matt showed up today. We checked the box. Their attendance is good. We showed up for the event. So that's step one. Step two, did we execute all of the requirements for that class? Whether it's an online learning event, they deliver out education to us, and then we show retention based off of maybe a couple online test questions or something to that nature. Or we show up to the day of the event and we're having benchmark checks throughout the day, interaction in there. Okay, we completed that checkbox. That's step number 2. Step number 3, those traditional metrics of training hours. Well, okay, this is an 8-hour event or a 4-hour event. Was Robbie and Matt there for the entire event, or did they only attend part of that training? And then it leads us into that course completion. So kind of backwards there, but what matters is we understand what those traditional metrics are. The readiness metrics, it leads it into not only the attendance, the training hours, the course completion, but it really dials into how well did one student retain the information. can we go out in the field tomorrow and can we demonstrate the same activity we trained on today in full competency? And in what level are we at, not just with the participation, but are we qualified for that? Did we receive certain credentials, whether it's a course completion certificate, whether it's a state or a federal or a national certificate of completion and training requirements? But also, how are we reinforcing our capability assessments? One key part there is we should always be assessing ourselves as well as our peers around us. So even when we have a live incident, part of the hot wash, we want to talk about those incidents. When we look at the resource metrics, there's, different layers and different functionalities with hot washes. Get in your small group. If you're in the incident command team, and part of this comes down from the state all the way down to the local agency, we have to instill that message in those processes. This a lot of times is a new concept out there of, what, 4 or 5 of us were a part of the incident unified command team. Well, do we sit as a group after the incident comes to a close and have a real time, 10, 15-minute hot wash right there together, face to face, and talk about the good, bad, and the ugly of that incident? We close down the EOC. Do we have a quick real time hot wash about what transpired just in the EOC there? It doesn't discredit the large hot wash after the fact, where we're bringing the field folks together with the EOC, with all players, to talk about how that incident went. But what we have seen tremendous success with is when we break those down into subsets. Hey, let's talk about what worked and what didn't work in the incident command post. Let's talk about what worked and didn't work in the EOC. Well, these were some of the challenges. Let's document them so we can go back to the proper people and get those resources allocated for the next time. We can always do better, but it's about how can we do those capability assessments to improve that position readiness and that overall outcome, ultimately demonstrating that operational capability. Now, as we go to the next slide there, that is what I call the operational perspective of it. When we talk about how can we deliver the traditional metrics into the readiness metrics. But when we look at the broad scale approach, when we're sitting, Robbie's sitting in his white shirt there in his office, and he's looking at what the folks across the entire state are doing, and a big picture. It looks at not just a single isolated incident. We need to be able to look at perspectives of what training should we be requiring across the state? What is our number of qualified personnel? How are our EOCs ready? Do they have staffing? Do they have resources? Is pieces that we need to allocate readily available to them? What exercises, full scale, tabletop, and in between, what exercises have been trained on and reviewed upon in order to get ready for the next incident? And then what do we need to improve upon? So when we look at that funnel of information, and this is a horrible depiction today, Robbie, because of where I'm sitting right now, but we'll make do. I go to the right hand side of the screen there, and we live in a visual world. We talked about how hands-on we are and how successful tabletop and full-scale exercises can be. But from an administrative capacity, it's also about being able to have that executive training summary. It's about having a visualization of what required training got conducted. Well, don't just give me a spreadsheet and tell me the numbers, but can we put it into visualization so you can look real time on a day-to-day basis to see across the state, or filter it down to a certain region or a certain half of the state? What is our training? Who's qualified out there? How prepared and ready are we if a disaster strikes in a particular stricken area? And so by being able to take the items on the left and tie them into a visual perspective where we're being able to pull real-time data across an entire state together so that we have a true depiction of what's going on, what qualifications from what players, who is coming to have a seat at the table, and where can we count on most? And then what do we need to improve upon? really will stretch that mind miles in there. And it's about that, again, that visualization. It's about really being able to depict that down into a solidified approach in there. If you can go to the next slide for us. So as we round out today, Robbie, and I turn it back over to you, I'll just leave, everybody that's joining us today with this message. When an EOC activates, a disaster strikes, or a major event occurs, success depends on more than just your training records. It depends on having personnel who are prepared, qualified, and ready to perform. It's our duty to make sure that we are meeting that benchmark. It's our duty as training officers, as administrators, as leaders in public safety across our states that we're working with all of our partners together as one unified approach to make sure that all of our members, from a local, a regional, a statewide approach, are all trained and ready to perform at any given disaster strikes. Whether that's supporting a local agency, whether that's a natural disaster that occurs over a large area of your state, doesn't matter. We have a due diligence there to make sure that we're not just checking a box on a sheet of paper saying, yeah, Robbie King did this training, Matt Schrantz did this training, but we want to know that they are qualified, that they are trained, and that they are going to be able to perform at 110% when that situation arises.
That was great stuff. I know we went over, and I apologize for that one there. Miss Ashley, if you want to just jump to our email addresses, there's not enough time to get everything in, I guess. We did answer a couple of the questions already throughout this. We're just very appreciative of everybody being with us. If you have more questions, would like to learn more about what Vector Solutions can do, please reach out to us by our emails. I love your feedback. If you would love to share your thoughts with me, please email Matt and I. We'd love to hear on this matter with you both, not just for our own knowledge, but to share that with others as well. So we thank you all very much for what you do and giving us your time. So thank you much. I'm going to turn this back over to the amazing Miss Karen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Robbie and Matt. I think the phrase that jumps out for me is snackable learning. With so many emergency managers wearing multiple hats and heavily scheduled, strategies for maximizing those training opportunities are so very important. So, Robbie and Matt, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you to Vector Solutions for your support. Thanks also to our great audience for participating. We're so grateful that you took the time to spend with us today and hope that you're leaving with new knowledge and skills to take back to your organizations. You can find out more about the NEMA Empowerment e-learning series and how to sponsor one of your own on the NEMA website, www.nemaweb.org, in the resources section. As a reminder, there'll be a short survey coming to you via email, and we would appreciate your feedback. Last, the recording will be available soon on the NEMA YouTube channel at NEMA for You, along with the others. Thank you again for attending. Take care, stay well, and enjoy a productive rest of the day. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.